On May 12, Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced a mega economic package of rupees 20 lakh crore in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, which has brought not just Indian but world economy to a screeching halt. Besides this stimulus package, in his 33-minute long speech, Mr. Modi talked about converting the calamity resulting from the coronavirus pandemic into an opportunity. And therefore, he said time was right for India to become self-reliant or Atmanirbhar. Interestingly, he had conveyed a similar message to the members of the Gram Panchayat in his interaction on April 24 as well. And that's not it. On May 6, Dattatreya Hosabale, the Joint General Secretary of the Rashtriya Sevak Sangh, had also said, and I quote, the Sangh believes the COVID-19 pandemic, besides an unfortunate and cruel challenge, has also brought an excellent opportunity to review our existing models of so-called development and our approach to ecology. A day after Prime Minister Narendra Modi's address to the nation, the Ministry of Home Affairs notified that paramilitary canteens will be selling only made in India products from June 1. So, is it the first step towards what Mr. Modi referred to as a self reliant India or Atmanirbhar Bharat? That is what we are going to discuss on this episode of Political Pulse. It is time I welcome my guest for this evening. Mr. Seshadri, a senior Bharatiya Janata Party leader and, of course, an RSS veteran. Mr. Manish Tewari, former union minister, and, of course, a very senior Congress leader and member of Parliament. Mr. Chari, Mr. Tewari, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Besides these two, of course, we've got Bhavna Vijay, our political editor at Outlook Magazine, and Puneet Nicholas Yadav, our assistant editor at Outlook Magazine. Again, very warm welcome to all four of you. I always make just one request to my panelists that, they're going to keep their answers a little short so that there is minimum intervention from my end and we get to ask as many questions as possible. Mr. Chari, let me come to you first. Mr. Modi spoke at length about, Atmanirbhar Bharat in his latest address to the nation on May 12. If I'm not mistaken, he used the word Atmanirbhar Bharat for about 17 times in his speech. Is it an indication? Is it an indication that we're looking at a more protectionist India in the time to come?
I mean, I thought you were going to say he used it 20 times. So at 20 minutes, 20 times. Anyway, this Atmanirbhar Bharat is actually Swadeshi in a different words. So it could be a tongue twister for some people. That is a different story. But neither Atmanirbhar Bharat, that is self-reliant India, nor Swadeshi, they are not new concepts. They have been there. In fact, Swadeshi concept is something that Mahatma Gandhi started during the freedom struggle. So it's actually a continuation of the freedom struggle, if you want to see it, look from that point of view. And the first Make in India exhibition was organized by none other than the first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. It was he who organized the first Make in India exhibition in Delhi. So since then, every Prime Minister and every Finance Minister has been talking about India being self-reliant, India being Swadeshi. But let us remember one thing. My idea, I mean, this is the idea, not just my idea, but I'm telling you, I have been associated with Swadeshi Jagran Manch right from its beginning, right from its inception in 1991. 1992, I became the editor of Organizer. Since then, I've been closely associated with Dattapant Thengdi, who can be called the founder of Swadeshi Jagran Manch, the idea of Swadeshi, and introducing the element of Swadeshi in Indian economic thinking. So the whole idea of Swadeshi is not new, but this has been packaged in a new form by Narendra Modi. A, B, it's very important that post-COVID we sort of recognize the importance of the whole idea of self-reliance, Atmanirbhar Bharat, the idea of Swadeshi, and instead of hair splitting on what Swadeshi is, whether RSS Swadeshi is correct or BJP Swadeshi is correct or Gandhian Swadeshi is correct. I think what the spirit of the underlying spirit of the movement or the word Atmanirbhar Bharat, Swadeshi or self-reliance is that economically we should not be dependent on any other country for any reason whatsoever. That is the whole idea.
All right. All right, Mr. Chari, I want to bring in Mr. Tewari here. Mr. Tewari, in a post-COVID-19 world, almost every major economy, every major country is looking inward. So if Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also talking about making India a self-reliant India, how do you react to it, and what exactly are your reservations, if at all, you have?
Well, first of all, may I thank you for hosting this webinar on the COVID-19 and its economic implications. And I would like to tell my friend Mr. Chari, whom I have great respect for, that his pre-COVID look looks better on him than the COVID look. So therefore, I want to consider.
Thank you. I'll take that hint.
So therefore, look. Going back to 1947, from 1947 till 1991, self-reliance had been the mantra of India's economic trajectory. And every government from 1947 onwards, and they were primarily Congress governments, except between 1977 and 80, and then between 89 and 1991, essentially believed that the socialistic pattern of society, state at the commanding heights of the economy, self-reliance, are the way forward for India. At a point in time when the world was divided into two power blocks and geopolitics had its own imperatives. But in 1991, it all changed when the Soviet Union and large parts of East Europe collapsed, and along with that, the communist ideology. And the Washington consensus on liberalization really became the overriding economic buzzwords. The push towards globalization became even far more pronounced. And so, therefore, between 1991 and 2020 now, what you've seen is a global integration of supply chains. And unfortunately, most of those supply chains start in China. And even today, China, which has a lot to answer for in terms of its role with regard to COVID-19, today remains the supplier of the first resort, even insofar as 40% of the medical equipment from the world is concerned. And even pre COVID-19, last year, when 56 companies decided to relocate from China, 28 of them went to Taiwan, 14 went to Thailand, and only 3 came to India. So, therefore, you see, changing the course of global economics is not going to be all that easy. And if you sort of extrapolate from there to the whole Make in India paradigm, which was which was unveiled by the Prime Minister in 2014, unfortunately, and I'm not trying to make a political point, Make in India has not succeeded. In fact, manufacturing growth was at 2% last year. Manufacturing growth over the past 5.5 years has stagnated at 7%. And if you were to look at it, it has been the share of manufacturing growth in the GDP of India has been constant at 17%. So therefore, under those circumstances, it's one thing to say that we should become self-reliant. It's another thing to walk the talk and try and re-engineer the trajectory which has been put in place by the play of geopolitics since 1991.
Mr. Tewari, before I get in Bhavna, I want to go back to Mr. Chari. Mr. Chari, a very important question here is that is it because over the past 6 years, I mean, it was in September 2014 when Prime Minister Narendra Modi unveiled the Make in India, a flagship program of the Bharatiya Janata Party government, or NDA one can say. 6 years later, the program has received at the very least a lukewarm response. So, as the opposition party, the principal opposition party, the Congress party, has said that, is it some sort of repackaging of Make in India, that is in the works right now as far as the NDA two is concerned now, and since it also happens to be right at the beginning of the NDA two.
No, it's not the beginning of NDA 2. I think we are well into
Yeah, a year,
1 year
almost
of
a
it.
year into it.
And
Yeah.
then, and the whole Make in India program continues from 2014. In fact, let me tell you, Make in India program was not invented in 2014. Make in India
Mhm.
program is also quite an old program. But there were, I would, I mean, let me begin with one more thing. I'm completely in agreement with what Manish Tewari said about the global supply chain and also the compulsions on Indian industry. It's a very sad situation that Indian industry, especially the manufacturing sector and the MSME sector, has not actually grown in the last 2 or 3 decades, right from say 1990 onwards. Pre 90, of course, there was no question. It was only Mr. Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh combination, which actually started opening up the economy. So when the economy opened up, that was the time when we should have probably reset the economic policies and principles. That is why I go back to what Narendra Modi said in his address to the nation on Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. He mentioned 5 important points: economy, uh, infrastructure, and more importantly, the system. He said the system is system of governance, system of administration, system of legal wrangle, system of law, everything concerning the system. I mean, I don't want to mention the word bureaucracy, although in my own tweet I have very categorically said bureaucracy and I have even named Niti Ayog.
Mm.
So these institutions are not going along with the times. They have not changed. We still do not have. We are very happy if we are 149 in the ease of business. From 149 we come to 145. We should be less than 14 as far as ease of business is concerned. You cannot compete with a country like China. You cannot compete with a country like US. You cannot compete with European Union. You cannot compete with Japan. You cannot compete with Germany if you have archaic laws, 1857 Companies Amendment Act, and you can't expect the industry to run along with this. So if you have to be globally competitive, you have to do so many other things. So what I would rather suggest is, I mean, don't mock the idea, don't kill the idea, welcome the idea, and
All right.
let us all put our
I
minds together and come to some suggestions as to
All right.
how
All
we
right.
can make Atmanirbhar Bharat a success.
I
No,
think
I
Abhiman, yeah.
want to come in here, sir. Sir, it's not about mocking the idea. I mean, like you said, like Manish also said that we have tried it earlier. I mean, we know Mr. George Fernandez in his when the Janta Party was there, he tried it in 1977 when Coca-Cola and IBM were both shunted
Wait,
out.
wait, 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 wait.
And just,
I
just,
had,
just wait.
yeah, yeah.
Let me
I'll come to
complete.
the point. Okay, okay, yeah.
And then later, late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi also tried nationalization of banks. And again, now we know where the banks are. So, what will be different this time? How do we ensure that this Swadeshi is different and is not going to go the same way? And like you said, ease of business. So, what will the government do to ensure that unless we do those, unless we have ease of business in our country, you will not have people coming in, putting in money, or even setting up factories here?
Yeah.
See, what the government will do, I mean, your guess is as good as my guess. So don't ask me what the government is going to do. I can tell you what the government should do. Two things. A, you mentioned about Mrs. Indira Gandhi bank nationalization. Now, bank nationalization is not actually Swadeshi. So I mean, let me be very clear about it. At that time, probably bank nationalization was an important aspect. According to her, she thought it's a politically and economically a good move. It was a good move to begin with, but it did not succeed for various reasons. And now we have again merging the banks. That again, I am not very happy about the decision to merge banks. But whatever it is, we can discuss the bank nationalization issue and the banking sector as such, the problems and issues of banking sector as such as a separate issue. But I'm not going getting into that. A. B. You mentioned about George Fernandez. I specifically remember that issue. George Fernandez and Dr. Murli Manohar Joshi were in the forefront of that movement of breaking Coca-Cola bottles in front of Gyara Murthy. Uh, there are 11 statues, Mahatma Gandhi followed by 10 more people. That is why it is called Gyara Murthy. And I still remember the police officer at that time who was there. I was there actually in that issue, in that at that scene. The police officer, कम से कम आप लोग एक डब्बा या कुछ लाते हो उसके अंदर बॉटल फोड़ते हैं, बॉटल को रास्ते में क्यों फोड़ के आप चले जाते हो, he said. So I still remember that incident, and it served no purpose at all. Swadeshi is not, you cannot see product basis. Swadeshi cannot be seen on a product basis or a process basis. Swadeshi has to be a total workout. It's a total effect on economy. You have to change the mindset of the people, you have to change the mindset of the government, you have to change the mindset of the administration, you have to change the mindset of the bureaucracy, you have to change the mindset of the industry, and it is a collective activity. So if
Mr.
this
Chari,
band-aid solution will not happen, you
M-
have to have a totally reorientation. If that
Mr. Chari,
happens, it
Mr.
will
Chari,
it will
Mr.
work.
Chari. All right. I want to bring in Puneet, but before Puneet comes in, I want to ask you, just taking a cue from what you just said. You talked about. It seems that you're talking about revamping an entire system. So it is again going to take a lot of time. It is going to take years and years. What exactly is the government planning as of this moment? Besides the declaration of the 20 lakh crore package that we have heard of, and in stages that finance minister is talking about various aspects of the package. Besides that, what is exactly government planning to do over the next, let's say, 4 years, that it is going to stay in power before elections happen again? And then Puneet comes in.
No, 4 years
Mr.
is too much of a time. I'm not talking about 4 years. I think what the government is thinking is in the short term, say in the next 3, 4, 5 months, you open up the economy from bottoms up. That is the MSME sector, the small and medium scale sector. So the government has already redesigned the MSME sector, the entry level of the MSME sector, and the exit level of the MSME sector. So I think more small scale industries will come into MSME sector, and there will be more credit available to MSME sector and the small and medium scale sector. Because you remember one thing, the maximum number of non-agriculture labor employment is in the MSME sector and the small scale sector. Besides agriculture, next big ticket employment opportunity is there. So that has to improve, that has to expand. So that is the short term program of the government, and it will not take off immediately, but it will meet the local domestic demand.
All
But
right, Mr.
still,
Chari.
we have to also look into international demand. And
All
in
right.
case of international demand, there are so many other factors which we have to work about. We don't have actually access to a number of international business forums.
Uh, I think we have lost connection with Seshadri. Mr. Chari, I think Puneet can quickly come in. Did you have a question with Mr. Chari?
I had a question for both Mr. Chari and Mr. Manish Tewari.
Yeah, go ahead.
As Mr. Chari was also pointed out, that this Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliance is nothing new, and it's something that's been repackaged, and we've been hearing about it over the last 70 years. With the with our own experience of, as Bhavna was pointing out, what happened in 1978 with the exit of IBM and Coca-Cola, and there were, if memory serves right, I think there were another 54 companies which had applied to the government and the RBI at that point in time, who wanted to exit India. From there on, then 1991, as Mr. Tewari pointed out, and now. So my question is, if we've lost Mr. Chari, then I think I'll first ask my question to Mr. Tewari.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Manishji, we've seen over the years that a lot of problems with grand ideas that governments, irrespective of the political party, the government's come up with is in the implementation of the measures that are announced, or the schemes or plans that are announced. Make in India, for instance, for all the talk about Make in India, we've not really seen any grand achievements to show for, to account for when it comes to Make in India. And now we've got this Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. So, do you think that there is one greater need for first doing a proper audit of what Make in India achieved? And second, if done wrong, or if there are problems with the implementation, do you think that the gains made with the new economic policy of 1991 will be lost if there is this kind of panic among foreign investors who are coming into India?
But Puneet, I think you make a very relevant point, and just let me try and flesh it out a little. What was the fundamental basis of self-reliance that we pursued between 1947 and 1991? That you kept barriers to entry for both capital and for intellectual property very high. In other words, your custom tariffs were among the highest in the world. And so, therefore, that was a way of incentivizing local production at the cost of, let's say, means of production or pre-manufactured goods coming in from outside. Now, what it did was that it actually promoted a very shoddy kind of self-reliance. For years, you had to live with an ambassador or you had to live with a Fiat car. I remember those days when there used to be an MP's quota for Bajaj Chetak scooters and for Vijay Super scooters. And with great respect, those machines could have been much, much better made. Things only started changing when you had a little more competition, let's say with Maruti coming into the automobile sector. And once you liberalized, you've actually not looked back. It's another matter whether that liberalization of the automobile sector, which was EMI linked in the absence of corresponding infrastructure, has been something good for India or not. But that's another question altogether. So therefore, the only way you will promote self-reliance is by raising tariff barriers. Now, as long as you are a member of the World Trade Organization, would you be permitted to raise those tariff barriers beyond a point? Would that invite expulsion from the World Trade Organization? And then, even presuming if you were to raise those barriers and you were to turn isolationist or you were to turn completely inwards, do you have the capacity to be able to produce goods at an economical cost, which are also optimally efficient or which are optimally good? And so, therefore, those are the questions that we really need to ask before embarking on this Atmanirbhar Bharat. Do you have the capacity, both in terms of intellectual bandwidth, processes, and the manufacturing capacity on the ground to be able to actualize it? And the answer is no. And that's why Make in India bombed, because you did not have these three capacities. So your manufacturing growth as a percentage of GDP has stagnated at 17%, as I earlier pointed out. You were expecting a 14% jump in manufacturing because of Make in India. It stagnated at 7%. And last year, the growth was only 2%. So it's one thing to make these bombastic announcements, and it's another thing to walk the talk.
Mr. Tewari, what you're saying appears to be a legitimate argument, of course, but I also want to ask that India, over the past 5-6 years, ever since Prime Minister Narendra Modi, came to the PM office, the number is around 3,000 goods. India has actually increased tariffs on about 3,000 goods over the past 6-7 years. Is it also because that India wants to reduce its dependence on countries like China? For instance, our imports, I think last year, in March 2019, stood at around $50 billion. So is Atmanirbhar Bharat also a step in that direction, reducing India's dependence on countries like China, and producing products which can be produced in the domestic market?
So therefore, let's look at some hard numbers. Over the past 6 years, China's share in global manufacturing has gone up from 20% in 2014 to 28.4% in 2019. India's share has remained at 3%. India's imports from China, mostly manufactured goods, were to the tune of $74.72 billion in 2019 to $54.2 billion in 2014. India's exports to China are primary and intermediate products were at $18 billion in 2019. In 2018, China exported 2.49 trillion worth of goods. India's exports were 330 billion against 314 billion in 2014. These are the hard numbers. So therefore, and these numbers demonstrate that Make in India has not made an incremental difference to either an increase in our share of global trade, especially insofar as manufactured goods are concerned, and even with regard to import substitution, insofar as the import of manufactured goods are concerned. So therefore, as I was earlier saying, it's not going to be easy, that it's not a switch which you turn off and you turn on. You are a part of global trading arrangements, global trading regimes. Once COVID-19 recedes, there is going to be an immense pushback from all those countries. There are various other geopolitical imperatives that you'll have to, and strategic imperatives that you'll have to account for. I'll give you an example. All that what you're seeing on the border with China currently is primarily because India holds the rotating chairpersonship of the World Health Organization at the moment. And one of the first items on the World Health Organization's agenda is to grant observer status to Taiwan
Yeah,
again.
I can only see my own face. Other faces I can't see.
Sir, we can hear you.
I can
Are
hear
you?
you.
Yes, sir.
Everybody,
You're
Yeah,
there.
everybody
right.
can see each other now. Yeah, go ahead.
So therefore, you see, it's not going to be easy to carry out that reorientation that you talk about. And then, finally, even let's suppose you're able to bring about
Yeah.
import substitution, would you be able to bring about that quality? When did India open up? India opened up when there was a huge push from the Indian middle class that what we are getting in terms of consumer goods is extremely shoddy compared to what we are able to import or get from abroad at maybe half the cost. So therefore, cost, quality, and all these issues are going to be very germane to the ability to your ability to be able to service the needs of your of your countrymen. I'll just conclude with one example. In 1987, I
Yeah.
was I had gone to the erstwhile Soviet Union, and we were in Kazakhstan, which is now an independent country, and I lost my toothbrush. And so therefore we went to buy a toothbrush, and we got a toothbrush which was this long, which had camel hair at the end. So here was the superpower, which was manufacturing tanks and guns and heavy artillery, but was not able to manufacture a proper toothbrush. And I came and gave that toothbrush to my mother, who was a dentist, and she actually hung it in their department as an example that such toothbrushes exist in the 20th century. So therefore, I think there's a need to get real about all this Atmanirbhar Bharat, etc.
I think Puneet had a question. Puneet, do you want to
Yes,
come in?
Puneet, go on.
Yeah. So, currently it's tangentially perhaps linked to the Atmanirbhar Bharat narrative, but currently we're seeing a major migrant crisis. We're also seeing most people who are returning from their places of work to their hometowns. The situation currently does not perhaps seem like it's going to get back to normal again. For Atmanirbhar Bharat to succeed, a layman's perspective possibly would be that you need the labor back at places where it can work. The MSME sector currently has been reeling under a shock of the double shock of the demonetization and GST, and now of course we've got the government announcing a package for MSMEs. But I want to know from Manish, how much of an impact is this package going to have on actually reviving the MSMEs? Secondly, if the migrant labor crisis continues and you don't have the workforce to get back into the MSME sector, would this Atmanirbhar Bharat end up being a non-starter?
No, your apprehensions are absolutely correct. I mean, what has happened to our poor and to our working class is an insurmountable tragedy. It's the worst humanitarian crisis, man made, after the partition of India of 1947 and the refugee crisis of East Pakistan in 1971. Millions and millions of people forced to walk home with their belongings on their heads, with little children in tow. I mean, it shows or demonstrates our complete insensitivity, both as a government and as a society. Um, while the government obviously is at fault, but equally at fault are those employers who decided that we are not going to pay our workers. And it is actually those employers who have been in the forefront of getting these people registered even on migrant trains coming home. So all those lighters who are now saying, "Oh, the labor is going. What will happen to our units?" Where were you when you needed to stand up for your working people? So in a sense, they actually deserve what they are getting, and I say it with the fullest sense of responsibility, because of the simple reason that they have behaved in the most insensitive manner possible, and the manner in which those people have been brutalized on the streets, beaten along the way. They ain't coming back, boss. They're not coming back. So therefore,
Bhavna,
they're not
Yeah.
coming back in a hurry.
yeah, Bhavna, yeah,
Yeah.
you go ahead before I ask
Yeah,
something. Yeah.
I think Professor Chari is not here, but I just wanted to raise a point. Uh, the Prime Minister talked about going local and being vocal about it, and yet he wants to be a part of the global supply chain. So, Manish, do you see any discrepancy there? I mean, do you think we can go local and we can be Atmanirbhar and we can be Swadeshi and yet be a part of the global supply chain?
Well, I think it's confused economics, and it's lack of coherence altogether. See, there is post 1991. There has only been one dominant economic thought in the world, and that's the Washington Consensus, underpinned by the Bretton Woods institutions. It is the US which, after Trump decided to pull the plug on him, because they felt that it is working more for China than it is working for them, which is true. Because if you drive around the industrial belts, which is called the Rust Belt of the United States, the Midwest, etc., where they had their automobile manufacturing, those have become completely, absolutely ghost towns. So, from the US's perspective, the mass unemployment which globalization brought about, the impoverishment of their societies, the destruction of their social fabric, especially in the manufacturing towns, has impelled this shift towards being nationalistic or to close borders. But then there's an equally large school of thought led by the Democrats who do not believe that this is the way forward. So therefore, as I was saying, that what you are seeing play itself out in the United States of America, which has been in the forefront of gutting the neoliberal economic order, may be something that turns out to be ephemeral or transitory. And in November 2019, you have a major course correction.
Okay,
Uh,
another thing, I don't know if Professor Chari has been able to join us, but again,
yeah.
it's a little unfair to put the question to Manish because he's on the opposite side. Uh, I think he's joining. Professor Chari, are you here?
You've been trying to
Okay,
connect.
We
yeah,
can hear your voice though.
Professor Chari.
Okay,
Okay,
Bhavna, if I could quickly just just very quickly ask a very
Yeah,
simple question. In fact, I had this question for both the panelists,
yeah.
Mr. Chari as well as Mr. Tewari. I wanted to understand that India happens to be an exceptionally young country, an exceptionally ambitious country. For a youngster of a, let's say, 25, 26-year-old man or a woman who thought of buying an iPhone, do you think he or she is in a position to shift to a Swadeshi mobile or a Micromax mobile right now? Since you talked about the efficiency of the product and you talked about the quality of the product, I wanted to ask this question to both of you, but Mr. Tewari, if you could shed some light on it.
No, I think you've answered the question yourself by the example that you gave, which validates the point I was trying to make earlier. You see, the thing is that self reliance will also have to be at a concurrent level of quality, a concurrent level of competitiveness. Yeah, in fact, the entire opening up, and I think Bhavna would be a witness to that era. I remember in the middle 70s, etc., when we were growing up, we were in school. You know, there was this massive push from below. I recall when people would come from abroad. You know, you would tell them that, please buy a television for me, or
Yeah.
please buy an FM radio for me,
Mm.
and getting through customs used to be an absolute nightmare, and custom officials used to be lord and masters of all that they survey. So
Even
our
even even Levi's jeans and Wrigley's were brought from
yeah,
abroad.
yeah. You are absolutely correct. So, do we want to go back to that kind of control? Do we want to go back to the license quota and permit Raj? So, therefore, it's one thing to say Atam Nirbhar Bharat. It's another thing to completely re-engineer
Mm.
the global economic order. And plus, if let's suppose you decide that we are going to be extremely nationalistic and we are going to put up our custom tariffs and not allow products to come in, it begs the question, then are people going to really give you the raw material also? So therefore, if you put up your tariff barriers, correspondingly tariff barriers will go up in other countries also. And that makes the entire supply chain completely uncompetitive. And once that becomes uncompetitive, prices go up. And in an economy which has already been impoverished and which looks uncertain, that is going to be an economic cost which is going to be loaded onto your people.
So I think
Puneet,
the government, I think the government has a lot of explanation to do about how they are going to go about it. Though the finance minister said that going local does not really mean that we are going to be isolationist.
yeah.
So, but I don't.
In fact,
But I think, yeah.
yeah, Mr. Modi also talked about the same thing. He also said that India is going to play a very central role in the post COVID-19 world order, so to speak. Puneet, I think wanted to say something. Puneet.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of, divergent views on this whole thing of Make in India and Atmanirbhar India. So
Mhm.
I would have ideally wanted Mr. Chari to respond to this, but then possibly Manish, you could, shed some light that, on the one hand, you have the Prime Minister still talking about Make in India, and which essentially means that foreign companies come to India, make their products here. And there has been a lot of talk about the Statue of Unity being made, by the Chinese.
Yeah.
Now, so you have on the one hand this concept of Make in India. On the other, you're talking about a self-reliant India. So is there some kind of lack of clarity that do we consider a Samsung that is being produced in India an Indian product, or are we looking at producing brands within India? Because Mr. Modi talked about brands, and we all know his fondness for branding. So we've heard him about making brands at a local level. What happens to the brands that we were trying to court over the last several years to come to India and produce their products here?
Well, Puneet, you raise a very interesting question. See, the fact remains that if I am a global investor, what is the kind of newspaper that I read? I read the Financial Times, I read the Wall Street Journal, I read the New York Times, I read the Guardian, what has been the commentary about India over the last 2.5 years in the global press? The commentary has not been complimentary to India at all. You see, for economic progress, you require social cohesion. Money is a coward, and money goes to the safest harbor. And unfortunately, investors, even pre COVID, did not consider India to be a safe destination. And I gave you the example of the 56 companies, who came out of China. Out of those 56 companies, 28 companies went to Taiwan. The rest of them went to Vietnam and Thailand. And only 3 companies came to India. So somebody needs to ask the question that if we are this great investment destination, the horse self-reliance or Atam Nirbhar or whatever it is, why is capital not willing to come to India?
I think we've lost Professor Chari again. I think he was trying to come in. So but I don't know whether Manish can be the devil's advocate also. What I would like to know, see, we all know that RSS has been talking about being Swadeshi, going Swadeshi for a long, long time. I mean, right from Mr. Thengri, who wrote his book, entire thesis on Swadeshi.
The
And
third.
yeah, exactly, the third way. And then we had Mohan Bhagwatji talking about it just very recently. And so, do you think the government is now using it as an opportunity to enforce its ideology, or is it just making a virtue out of a necessity? That this is
It's
something we really need to do.
it's actually, Bhavna, they're doing neither. For the simple reason that where do you have the economic wherewithal to be able to back up your rhetoric? Every day of the lockdown has cost us 30,000 crores. We have effectively in the last 52 or 55 days wiped off 20 lakh crores from our economy. We are a 2 lakh 4,000 crore economy. 20 lakh crores gone. The entire budget of the Union of India is 30 lakhs and 42,000 crores. Where is the money to be able to back a major push towards Make in India? And even this credit guarantee of 3 lakh crores to the MSME sector, you're barking up the wrong end of the tree. You see, this is the mistake which the finance minister made even in the September of 2019, when she decided to address a demand side problem with a supply side solution that is giving a lakh 45,000 crores in rebate to the corporates. The fact is, when there is going to be no demand in the economy, who is going to offtake on the credit? Where are the buyers? Till the time you do not put money directly into the hands of people, you cannot revive this virtuous cycle. You have a demand collapse today on one hand, you have a labor exodus on the other, and you have a supply side collapse primarily because those people were operating on very thin margins and now are unable to get their act together. So it's a triple whammy. So you have to address it, by a multi-pronged approach, and you cannot just address it with a loan bailer.
Puneet wanted to, yeah. Puneet wanted to come
Yeah,
in.
we've the manner in which the prime minister has announced this, and if we look at our past 6 years, where the PM comes and makes one announcement and says that okay, from now on, this is what the policy is going to be. When it comes to setting up industries, setting up any kind of projects, most of the responsibility, and I'd like Manish to answer this also, because you're also on the parliamentary committee on finance, and so I'm hoping that there'll be some kind of a discussion on this whenever the parliamentary committees start meeting. But I want to know that where this is also an issue where the states will have to be brought into confidence, and then you'll also have to see what the states can do. And when you say Atmanirbhar Bharat, is there a risk? Because naturally, while setting up different industry, different projects, it's the states which are already doing well financially, which would have the kind of infrastructure that is needed to set up or scale up more projects? And would you end up creating a more lopsided domestic economy and a lopsided thing between states? Certain states like Maharashtra, which are already which have the infrastructure, will carry on developing in the manner in which they have been, while states which are lagging behind on infrastructure, like a Bihar or a Jharkhand, will not be able to cope up. So will you end up going from trade wars between countries to a trade war between states?
Yeah, within a country.
But where is the money? Who's coming? Look around the world. Look around the world. Every economy is stressed. Every company is downsizing, not even right sizing. People are losing jobs. People are cutting back on any future plans altogether. There we are in a phase of complete uncertainty, and therefore, even if you have a V-shaped revival of the global economy, it's going to take between 3 to 5 years. So who has the money to invest, and who in this environment is going to really take the risk in investing in let's say traditional manufacturing, so as to speak? It's one thing that your cyberspace companies will do very well. For example, Zoom will do well, StreamYard will do well, because that's the way people will try and connect with each other. This is exactly what happened in the US post the Spanish flu pandemic. Telephone actually really took off in the US because of the Spanish flu pandemic. But beyond those technologies which are essential in such a situation, I do not see any other. I don't see any appetite for manufacturing. So pharmaceuticals, obviously, which are geared towards finding a vaccine or a cure for COVID-19, they will ramp up investment. Let's say virtual platforms will ramp up investment. Connectivity platforms, your social media platforms will possibly see a ramp up because their stock prices, etc., would go up. But if you look at hardcore traditional brick and mortar manufacturing, that money is not there. So, this competition, Puneet, that you talk about is only going to happen when somebody is actually going to, put the money where his mouth is.
Mr. Chari, thank you so much for joining us back on the program. The piece that you wrote today in the print, its headline emphasizes that, modernization, yes, but westernization, no. Reminded me of Detto Panthangadi, an ideological stalwart of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, who had propounded the theory of Swadeshi economics in a series of essays in 1990s. Is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat also based on the same theory that, westernization is not modernization?
Correct.
Yeah.
The entire idea of Swadeshi Jagran Manch at that time was any technology that we require for this country. If we don't have the technology, we should be importing it. There is nothing wrong, but we only import that us. We should not be going in for a technology that is not required by us. Some technology, it doesn't mean we should take it. So we used to, at that time, it used to be said, we want technology for chips, but it should be computer chips and not potato. That was propagated at that time. So that is exactly what Prime Minister Narendra Modi has also said. We want technology from outside, but that technology which is useful for us and which will strengthen our self-reliance.
So, Prime Minister Modi talked about going local and that we should make our local brands into global brands. And yet he said that, India has to be a part of the supply
Yeah,
chain, of the global supply chain. So, isn't there a dichotomy between the two?
right. No, there is strengthening global supply chain is correct. I think
in the modern times, as far as globalization is concerned, if you go through his speech that he made to the special group of non-aligned movement on 5th May, he spoke to that special group of non-aligned movement. India has been part of the non-aligned movement right from its inception, right from its beginning. There he used the words, we need a new template of globalization. So we are not against globalization. We are not against global trade. But what we are saying is we should not give up our local manufacturing sector, MSME sector, and local availability of demand and supply at the cost and give it up and then go global. We should not do that. So there must be a link. I think the Swadeshi movement, terminology that which the Prime Minister is using, Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, should be a bridge between local and global. We have to think globally but act locally. That is the whole idea behind which he is speaking about this.
So now that now we have you back with us. So another thing that we had wanted to ask you earlier is that on one side the entire world is also closing up a little bit. They're all become economically
Mhm.
nationalistic, like for example US and everyone. And in this scenario, uh, we are not even likely to get too many. I mean, it's becoming almost like de-globalization or contra-globalization, maybe you can call it, whatever is happening in the
Mm.
world. So this Swadeshi thing. So is it a way for the government, for the BJP to go back to its ideology, or is it something that is need of the hour now? Because anyway, you can't really, because the entire world is closing up. So are we making a
No,
virtue out of necessity?
no, Swadeshi is an ongoing process. What started in 1947, even during the run up to the independence movement, Mahatma Gandhi also emphasized on the same issue of strengthening Hind Swaraj. In his Hind Swaraj, he speaks about village economy and strengthen India's intrinsic strength. So Swadeshi is not against global trade, but that does not mean we should see take the spirit behind what the Prime Minister says. More and more countries are going to look inwards,
Hmm.
and they will start looking inwards because the situation is forcing them to look inwards. There are countries in Southeast Asia which have stopped dealing with China as far as edible products are concerned. As far as products which goes into the physically into the system, they have stopped that. Why? Because they are afraid of the hygiene and health conditions of their people. So these countries are going to depend on their own local production. Similarly, India is also thinking in terms of local production. There is nothing wrong in it.
No, coming at the
But at the
time
same
when,
Mr.
time,
Chari,
yeah.
we will have to have,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
go ahead,
we
sir.
will
Go ahead.
have to
Go ahead.
have we will have to have a global trade architecture which will recognize the importance of local production, at the same time a global trade structure.
So, how do we differentiate between Swadeshi, Make in India? Because a Swadeshi company could be a company which is owned by an Indian and which makes Indian products, or it could be a foreign company which is making in India. For example, Samsung producing in India, or any other foreign company producing in India. So, what exactly would
Hmm,
Swadeshi mean? Because there is not no clarity on that. For example,
hmm,
if the canteens of the paramilitary forces, if they decide to go Swadeshi, and now probably the army is thinking the same. That is what
hmm.
we've heard. So, what exactly does it mean? What all will they be able to sell there, and what will they store there, sell there, and what all will not be allowed to sell there? Maybe, I mean, can they only sell Maruti cars? or even Maruti is not completely Indian in that way.
Completely Indian now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct. See, if you look go product wise, this is the mistake that Swadeshi Jagran Manch and proponents of Swadeshi did in 1991-92 till about 1996-97. In fact, the founder of Swadeshi Jagran Manch, Dattopan Thengdi, very categorically said that Swadeshi should not be linked with product. Swadeshi is an ideology which should be propagated in the proper type. And so don't go by product. Swadeshi is not boycott of X product and acceptance of Y product. Swadeshi should ideally mean strengthening India's intrinsic strength of manufacture, of meeting the local demands with local supply chain. If we can do that, well and good, because that gives us not only manufacturing strength but also employment. We need not buy a car or a mobile which is manufactured outside, which gives employment to an outside element, whichever country it is. We are not against the employees of that particular country or capital formation of that particular country, but not at the cost of local employment. That is the idea of Swadeshi. So Swadeshi should be able to generate capital, generate demand, meet supplies, and at the same time also guarantee employment locally. This is the idea of Swadeshi.
Mr. Chari, it sounds well and good when we discuss it on a panel, and when it forms part of a discussion, no doubt. Over the past 70 years, successive governments have taken steps towards boosting India's manufacturing sector. Over the past 7 years, Mr. Modi has been talking about it relentlessly, no doubt about it. But what exactly is the reason that we've failed to maintain or sort of able to develop the efficiency and quality, let's say, that we expect, from some of the foreign companies, and the kind of impact they have been able to leave on our market. Let's say an iPhone assembled in China, and the way it has captured Indian market here as well. Secondly, just very quickly, just to add to that, is that India happens to be a very ambitious market. They expect that kind of quality. Your thoughts on that, sir?
Correct. See, Swadeshi should mean compromise with cost, price, because ultimately the demand and supply dynamics is decided by not only quality but also by cost. So if X product is available at X price, which is cheaper than the Indian price, people would necessarily go for the foreign price, foreign commodity, because it is cheaper. Ultimately, that is what is going to happen. So now we will have to see to it that A, ease of business is possible, B, labor is available, C, capital is also cheaper, and laws and rules and regulations help manufacturing. That is why Prime Minister insisted on these four elements. So he spoke about labor, he spoke about capital, he spoke about laws, and these factors are very important if you want to strengthen manufacturing sector. For example, we take only one small example quickly. We started sometime in 1993-94, we started exporting iron ore, and we imported manufactured finished steel. We exported iron ore to Japan, we exported iron ore to China. Now, why this was happened? This happened because the export price was higher for us. We got a lot of foreign exchange, and cost of production in India was much higher than the imported cost of the finished products. Now, this is very anomalous situation. We have allowed our iron and steel industry because of these policies.
So just one thing that I wanted
We
to
are
ask you
enough
now.
coal in the country, but still we are importing coal.
Yeah.
Why should we do this? So these are all policies that has to talk on behalf of the government of India. The whole this concept of self-reliance, Atmanirbhar Bharat, is that it cannot be a band-aid solution. It has
Okay.
to be a totally revamping of the economic policies of this government.
Okay.
Sir,
Abna?
I hope somebody is listening to you and they're actually going to implement it. Just one thing, another thing I wanted to ask you, the last thing, you know,
I hope
la-
so.
last few days, the statements that have been coming from RSS, from the party, from the government, is there a design to it? Because even Organizer, the magazine which you edited, even that had Swadeshi on the cover last week with Mohan Bhagwatji's
Hmm.
his speech that he had made. Even in that speech, he had
Yes.
referred to Swadeshi, and then
Hmm.
they recently we had, the RSS had a meeting with Dattatreya Hosabaleji. He had a meeting with the foreign correspondents. There again, he talked
Hmm.
about Swadeshi, and then now the PM comes and says the same thing. Is there a design to it? Is there reiteration of the
Hmm.
ideology, or what exactly is happening? How do you explain this, or is it just a coincidence?
No, it's certainly not a coincidence, and it doesn't have a design per se. But what I would say is these are all actually reaction to the emerging situation. Every country speaks about all these things at a time of crisis. When there was a crisis in the US, they spoke about be American, buy American. And the Russians did the same thing. And all the countries, every country takes care of its own internal economic dynamics at the time of crisis. Now, in the last almost 2 decades, say from beginning from the 90s onwards, in fact, the China's rise economically and militarily has almost finished or almost affected all global trade architecture. In spite of WTO, there are more than 16 trade bodies in the West. TPP is under negotiation for last 20 years. Transatlantic Partnership is being negotiated. RCEP is being negotiated. So we also need a global trade body. We have to be part of a global trade body, but at the same time, we have to improve our local manufacturing if you want to give employment to especially those people who cannot be usefully employed in agriculture alone. So these are all some of the factors that we have to take into consideration, and this has been an ongoing process. It's a work in progress. So, at a time of crisis, it is just a coincidence that everybody is speaking about the same thing. It's not that only the BJP is saying it, the industry is saying it, businessmen are saying it, bankers are saying it, even the Congress party is saying the same thing. So we have to strengthen India's own manufacturing sector, and there is no two opinion about it. So it's just a matter of collective opinion that everybody is expressing.
Mr. Chari, before we end this conversation, on a lighter note, do you think we can actually look forward to a time when Prime Minister of this country will not probably be traveling in a BMW and an indigenously produced car?
I hope we are able to produce an indigenous car which is not only as good as BMW but better than BMW. We should do that.
Well, on that positive note, I think it's been a fabulous conversation on this episode of Political Pulse. Mr. Chari, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you,
And
sir.
besides Mr. Chari, of course, Bhavna and Puneet and Mr. Tewari, who were there earlier on the program, Political Pulse will be
Yeah,
back
thank,
next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
thank,
sir. Thank you.
thank.